David Rothenberg and Sharon Dolin here tonight, wherever you all are listening. David, where are you right now?
Oh, I'm in the Hudson Valley in my studio here with, instruments and a little stone cottage behind my house where I hide from the world.
So maybe we should have you play at the very close something in old style beatnik fashion while.
Oh yeah, I could do that.
We won't make you do that. Okay.
I could do it. No problem.
Yeah. Old style beatnik fashion while.
Oh yeah. I could do that.
We won't make you do that. Okay.
No problem. Yeah.
My mic seems to be reverberating. I'm gonna.
Oh, there's echoes.
No problem. My mic seems to be reverberating.
It's creating the.
Okay, I'm gonna go without. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's going crazy. Everyone who's got headphones, put them on. Yeah.
But now we have no reverb, right? I'm not going to use my 1950s style mic. Sharon, where are you right now?
I'm in Manhattan, the Upper West Side, and actually it's the 7 o'clock shout to all of the healthcare workers. I hear them out my window. Usually there's a foghorn sound, but I don't hear that. The windows are closed, but yes, that's where I am.
And now I'm going to direct, we have these very storied, lauded people tonight who are talking with us, but I would like to direct you both to their respective bios. David is a longtime editor and writer and poet and musician who travels the world, but read more about him. Sharon is also known more as a poet and as a teacher and has bravely come forth with this memoir, which we're going to talk about tonight, and also runs some exciting writing about art in Barcelona workshops. But, read up and you can find out more. But so what we're going to do tonight, 2 books that came out, both published by Terra Nova Press, The Possibility of Reddish Green and Hitchcock Blonde. Yes, thank you. Okay. Yeah, David, there's a visual. Look at that. Look at these. And they have a lot to say to each other. It's not just that. Nice. Like we didn't get the mics, but we're getting the. Good job. You guys are going to make, the Zoom fun, the live stream fun. Okay. So the thing that we're going to talk about first is you two are old time friends. Can you just say a little bit about that? How long you've known each other?
A long time.
A long time, yes. I think we met through our mutual writer friend, Evan Eisenberg.
I think that's right, yes. And he's also involved with Terra Nova Press. And, he's kept us together all these decades. And this is, he's also a fine writer and editor. And I think that, he knows a lot of interesting people. Make sure they get to know each other.
But you both are perhaps connector spirits as well, is my guess. Or I know that about you, David, and I'm guessing that about you, Sharon. I think let's start, Sharon, do you mind if I throw you in first? Let's have you read a section. The way this evening is going to go, we have about an hour together. The last 15 minutes, we're going to have a chance to look at YouTube and Facebook and see you out there in viewer land, any questions you might have. But we're going to have a chance to hear both Sharon and David read at different points and have a conversation. And one of the reasons that we're coming together tonight is because both these books have a relevance to our weird current moment, the pandemic, the moment of struggle in terms of identity and perception and issues of how history gets written. So we're going to uncover a lot of things. But okay, so first let's just hear Sharon and have her tonality in our view. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Edie. I did choose to read because I can read it in full, the preview to the collection. And you could say it does preview the centrality of my mother and her mental illness And if you think about it, the first main chapter is called The Man Who Knew Too Much and the Girl Who Knew Too Little. And you could think about it in the context of those movies where there's the kidnapping of the child, particularly the first Man Who Knew Too Much, where there's actually an adolescent girl who's kidnapped. So if you keep that in mind as the metaphor I'm using from Hitchcock.
May I, right before you begin, just say, this is an incredibly soul-bearing memoir, which uses Hitchcock as a through line through which Sharon makes sense of a life that's really been marked by the kind of trauma that many of us can understand and many of us have lived through and many of us will never touch. And so that she's even managing to make this beautiful weave out of it is incredible. So yes, please carry forth.
Yeah, all the happy bits of my life are left out. That's for a different book. So this is, again, preview at the movies. My sister Marla has taken me to see 1,000 Clowns at a local movie theater in Brooklyn. Either the Marine Theater on Flatbush Avenue or the Brook Theater around the corner on Flatlands Avenue. These being two movie theaters we used to frequent after getting a slice of pizza and a soda for lunch. It is 1965 and I am 8 years old, a skinny girl with dirty blonde hair and bangs wearing a candy-striped blouse over powder blue shorts. Marla is 13, on the cusp of puberty, with reddish brown hair parted on the side and a light sprinkling of freckles on her face. She is wearing a paisley button-down shirt over culottes. I cling to her and follow her whenever she will let me. We are in the middle of watching the movie when my mother enters the darkened theater and leans over to speak to us from the aisle. "Come on, we have to go," she tells us in a loud whisper. My sister and I both hesitate. What is she doing following us into the movies? Don't you want to see where I work? I have no memory of my mother holding down a job. Under pressure from my dad, she would find a clerical job for a week or two, then collapse under the strain of it and have to quit. Perhaps this is one of those rare weeks. Maybe there is something manic in her voice, or maybe it is just her peculiar behavior coming after us like this in the movie theater. My sister and I both sense something is off, but really, what can we do? She is our mom, after all. We nod our heads and creep out of the theater along with her. We have our Chrysler convertible then, a big pale green car with a white top, stainless steel gleaming trim, and white wall tires. Of all the used cars my dad has bought over the years, this is our favorite. It is summertime and Mom has the car's top down. What does Mom look like this afternoon? I picture her wearing one of her sleeveless, loud flowered tent dresses with a two-stranded choker of iridescent white glass beads at her neck. She is already beginning to get plump. She has just had her hair done at the beauty parlor, so it sweeps up away from her broad forehead into a raised confection over her head, a bouffant made popular by Lady Bird Johnson. The hairdo always reminds me of the spun cotton candy I get at Coney Island. Mom always wears lipstick, hot pink or orange, and rouge, as she calls it, which I like to watch her apply by first touching her lips and then rubbing some of the lipstick into her high cheekbones. Her face always has a greasy shine to it. She never applies face powder, which makes her large nose stand out between her small blue eyes. We jump in the back seat and she begins driving us down Flatbush Avenue, then all the way into Manhattan. After a while, it becomes clear she has no idea where she is going or why. "Ma, where's the office already?" my sister calls out. "Soon, don't you like driving around with me?" Neither of us replies. The longer she drives, the more we understand there is no office to show us. My sister and I are silent. Our mom is having one of her breakdowns, we both realize, as we give each other a knowing look. We are in danger. It has happened before. Mom is out of control. Who knows where she is taking us, what she will do. We need help, fast. Mom stops the car at a red light and my sister jumps out, telling me, "Wait here." I jump out and run after her, afraid to be left alone with Mom. I see Marla has spotted a cop and is running up to him, crying out, "Help, Help, please help us. Our mother is running away with us. She's having a nervous breakdown. Please, please call our dad. Surely my mom comes running up at this point. Is she yelling? Is she telling the cop to take his hands off her kids? How does he know to trust me and my sister and not my mother? Is my mom so obviously crazy looking? All I know is that the cop, tall and handsome, looking like an Irish version of my dad, grasps each of us by the hand and says, Mrs. Dolin, I'm going to have to ask you to wait here until your husband shows up to sort things out. He has already radioed the station, and someone there miraculously locates my dad, who arrives in about 20 minutes. How lucky we are he was in the office and not out of town on one of his sales trips. Daddy, Daddy, I run to embrace him, knowing we are safe, and get caught up in a queasy, familiar feeling of relief mingled with guilt. I am betraying my mother, showing my dad how relieved I am to be rescued from her. I know she will be taken away, hospitalized, for who knows how long. I will lose her, and she will lose me.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you. That's such a gripping, memorable section of the book. I'm so glad you read that.
Thank you.
David, would you like to read something that either is its own independent entity or relates to what Sharon just read?
Yes, I will read a section. I'm still thinking about Sharon's passage and about like films, which also were so important for me as watching after school these black and white things. My parents would tell me this was serious art. You should watch these, but they're also like kids would like them. They grabbed us in, and it made me think like about my mother. Hearing that, like, did my mother have some special relationship to this material? I don't really know. Can't really ask her, but I think that many people will read Sharon's book and start thinking about how these films and memories of films can be so important even years later. This book, The Possibility of Reddish Green, it's not a very long book, but somehow it's taken like almost 30 years to write it. Like I keep going back to it. I keep wondering if it makes any sense. It's also about working through some texts, not like a filmic text, but these philosophy texts that we all had to read. Like I got a PhD in philosophy for some reason, and everyone was obsessed with Wittgenstein, but this obsession, when I heard about it, went back earlier. It went back to, I guess it was in college I first started hearing people talk about this philosopher. Something about it got people obsessed, and there's an obsessive side to this story. It happens every time in so many classrooms all over the world. Some student is bound to get into trouble. He sifts all through Wittgenstein, then tries to be Wittgenstein. You've seen him before with that penetrating, hollow gaze, not the wounded, caged hunger of a Kafka. No, something more chilling, impossible to lie to, like an honest priest needing to flee the faith to which he belongs upon discovering a flaw in its underpinning. Oops. He's saying with the eyes, tell the truth. Take your time. The student may not just reflect this look. He may also try to learn by example to write something not about W, but in the style of W. And the professor rolls her eyes. I'm attracted to these remarks of Wittgenstein that are not considered to be at the core of his thought, but at the edges. I suspect it's also these notations that have inspired those outside of philosophy to consider the thorny presence of this philosopher in the midst of their century. He's asked for the impossible and the necessary, not philosophy of poetry, but poetry in philosophy, configurations of words that change the way we see the world. I think of my friend Chris B., living in a Cambridge basement, sheltered in the dark away from the clouds. He's up all night writing with colored crayons and huge cloth-bound folios, copying each phrase out of Wittgenstein's work on certainty, adding his own notes in other colors as he goes. Is this not philosophy most alive, most direct, turning away from the light and the condensation in the air? Is this not the obsession, essential for the quest at its core? He's too serious. and then works too hard. His professors disagree so much with his method that they fail him out of all the philosophy courses. He leaves the university, takes up babysitting, finds another college, majors in the study of children. Then his obsession with logic leads him into computing, then toward the construction of graphics programs in education programming. Now he's back to these questions. When the machine does what it is told, is it certain? Leaving philosophy, explaining through devices to the next generation. Has he done with the questions what Ludwig advised? Look into his eyes and decide if he cares. Chris, are you watching this? Are you listening? Is this an accurate account? I don't know. I have only fragments to read, and only a portion of these fragments matter at all to me. Surrounded by the barrage of information, the structure is so easy to miss. In the ticket offices of English railway stations after World War II, there was this admonishment: is your journey really necessary? Stay home. Wittgenstein wanted anyone who found themselves puzzling over a philosophical question to ask this very question. If you have nowhere to go, what can you hope to discover? He wants someone to tell him if there's any reason to think so much about all these strange, unanswerable things. The possibility of a between space that at first can't be seen, a hue between colors that cannot be mixed, a taste between foods that do not blend, a compound of chemicals that flee each other's touch. The blend of the unblendable is the sound our throats cannot produce, the nature that can only be imagined to exist, the word caught somewhere betwixt the mind and the voice, an unpronounceable diagram of the word. Okay. Stop.
Thank you. Wonderful. No, I mean, among many attributes of your work, Alone and Together, I appreciate this quality of passion and obsession. True to Hitchcock, true to Wittgenstein. I mean, it's really funny to say them in the same sentence.
Were they friends? Did they meet each other?
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, and you all riff up on the names at different points in the book. Okay, so if I were at home listening, or voyeuristically, appropriately enough, listening to this language game we're having right now, I would think, well, what relevance does this have to my life? So can you speak a little bit about, Sharon, you went deep into a pit of the past, and as a poet, which is so much more of a frontal simultaneous art than this active narrative and stringing together bits or pieces of life. I'm just curious, in terms of your own journey, going into trauma and emerging relatively unscathed, or unscathed. Okay, let me just say, for both of you have had epic journeys writing these books. And, right now we're in this pandemic where people are just thinking, okay, what's it going to be? Is it going to be like Vesuvius? What document are we going to have at this time? So I guess the question for you, Sharon, and actually for both of you is, but Sharon, I'll ask you first. Where were you at the beginning of writing this, and this kind of, long trail of writing? Where are you now? Like, what is that act of exorcism or sharing? What's different for you now?
You've asked actually a lot of questions.
I know. I do know.
Why do this? Why enter what you're calling the pit? Honestly, I've always wanted to write a memoir. And many years ago, I tried writing one directly about my mother and kind of gave up. It seemed dull. Daughter of a schizophrenic mother has been done before. It just didn't seem to be a way in that seemed creative and challenging and interesting to me. And so really the book began with the germinating idea for the book began when I was running a very high fever with the flu. It actually began, and I had come off of a really terrible affair, a destructive affair. And I thought, why not watch? I adore Hitchcock. I did grow up on him. If those who read the book will find that out. And I thought, I don't remember Vertigo as well as I should. Why don't I watch Vertigo? And I must have, on some unconscious, subconscious level, realized that there would be some way that the destructiveness of it's heterosexual desire of that movie. Somehow I must have been seeking it to some answer. And I was watching this movie, running 103, I don't know, more fever. And I had this eureka moment. I thought, yes, there's something in that movie, something about that dynamics of desire there, of the man wanting to make over the woman, of the woman wanting to somehow have the man desire her at any cost. I write about it in the final chapter of the book, which is Vertigo. So I had this idea, and then I thought, let me think about it. I was teaching a lot, and it took me a number of months until I finally said, oh, there's this movie, there's this movie, there's this. And I was able to very, very quickly come up with 9 movies that connected to parts of my life. And suddenly I felt the challenge, which to me was the challenge of metaphor, where I feel like not looking at something directly. First of all, there is a lot of trauma, and I almost needed help facing it. And the best way for me to face it was to use Hitchcock as both a lens and also a kind of a screen or a veil. Okay, let me go watch this movie, and maybe then I can think about these painful things. And also, if I think about my mother in terms of The Lady Vanishes, what does that tell me? Something about the alchemical process of metaphor, where you put together these two like and unlike things, and you get you get the gold, you get something else that wouldn't have been there. And that to me that's the creative process that's at the heart of poetry. And I thought, yes, I'm going to weave these together. I'm going to figure out, and I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. So I don't want to take up too much time. I can talk a little bit later about, I feel like that it made me face certain things in my life that I had not faced. It made me understand things. Again, I will just add one more metaphor in here. I talk at one point in the book about peripheral memory and, this idea of peripheral vision. Where you can look up at the stars, and because I'm not a scientist, but I do know this, that it's the rods in our eyes, which are on the sides, which are more sensitive to light. And so if you don't look at the star directly, you can actually see it better. And I thought, this is the same process here. If I don't look at my life so directly, and I watch this Hitchcock movie, things will emerge that were hidden. And I think things did emerge. You could say it's also a creative shaping. And yes, there is a shaping. And I think my memories are forever altered because now I see my life in terms of these movies in a strange way. But I think it gave me access to the memories that I did not have. And I made some connections that I would not have made, which we can talk about a little bit later. I do want to hear what David has to say.
Yeah, no, but it's a brilliant thing. And David's work also looks so closely at this idea of the oblique, using the triangulation to understand something. Anyway, yes, no, I love that. Okay, David, yes, tell us what.
Yeah, well, desire is hopeless. Like it just gets you into trouble. And Sharon's book reveals the kind of trouble you can get into. So because desire is so hopeless, you get driven into abstract impossibilities like philosophy. And, I never wanted to study philosophy. I never wanted to ask these questions. I felt driven into this ambiguity. And somehow I found myself in a pub in London talking to Ray Monk, another one of these guys who looked a bit like Wittgenstein, piercing eyes, and he wrote this massive biography of Wittgenstein. And he had just published it. It was a big thing. And I'm talking to him. I said, I'm thinking of studying philosophy. He goes, what? Philosophy? You must only go into a philosophy if you have a burning question that's just going to burn until you answer it. And I think, okay. When I got that question, then I'll go. And then, but I did think that, I'm not sure I know what the question is, but the burning intensity, that feeling, was something that I really was impressed by. Like, I wanted to go for that feeling. And I started being interested in people who had that feeling. And I started to suspect, as I was reading philosophy, that people weren't expressing it the way they should. Like, the meaning was something more poetic. It was more oblique and ambiguous. It wasn't these exact rules that were being articulated. It wasn't in the argument. It was beyond or between the words. And I was impressed that Wittgenstein wrote in these fragmentary statements. They were like little poems of philosophy. And when I bring that up in class, the professors would shoot me down. Like, you're missing the point. Let's argue about his ideas, not how he is expressing the ideas. But, isn't that why we pay attention to him? Isn't that not why so many people are influenced by him, because of this aphoristic, poetic style? And, you know, I could see that I was going at this material differently than I was supposed to. And so over the years, I kept thinking, I have to write about this. How come there's like 7 novels about Wittgenstein by different people? Some people even wrote 2. They were so obsessed. I want to write about that and sort of talk about this. And I wasn't sure how to do it. And so I kept writing over the years. And finally, I thought that, you know, there's something, a coherence that comes out of being in between the coherence and the logic. And so it is like a poetic philosophy. And what it means for us now, these questions are always around. These are such uncertain, fragmentary times that, you know, you should sit and read and write stuff like this. Many people say, oh, great, I'm stuck at home. I'm going to work. I'm going to write. I'm going to work all day. I'm going to get so much done. And if you're like me, it's like, oh, you don't know what to do because it all seems so hopeless. And out of this hopelessness, you know, that began with the hopelessness of desire, we can go into such possibility. And Wittgenstein thought this color did not exist, reddish green, and yet you see it in autumn all the time. That kind of always motivated me. What was he talking about? There's no reddish green, you know. Come on, there is. Let's go figure out what it is.
But it's so interesting also that you say all that, because I left both of your books feeling a weird hope in art, really as a means of meaning stitching together. You know, both of you have kind of hybrid lives in some way. I mean, maybe David a little more, but Sharon, I kind of sense the hybridity of your life. I mean, you like ekphrasis, you like writing, about art, you like to live in many modes.
I'm translating also. But
yeah,
this whole book is ekphrastic. An old college friend asked me, I didn't know that word ekphrasis, but would you say that this book is? And you could say my use of the movies is this ekphrastic impulse. I grew up very working class, but the one thing my dad always did is he took us to the museums. So I was always very visual from a very early age, and I was drawn to visual art. And obviously, who didn't grow up on the movies and on television when, and so, yeah, for me, it was a natural. I did want to say also, narrative and telling stories and seeing our lives through various lenses. That's just what we do. How do we make sense of a life? And we have to tell our story in many, many different ways. And so this was one way for me to make a kind of sense, but that's only one sense. I will obviously go on and write other books, and I'm going back to writing other poems. But I think we're all living through screens now, quite frankly, and they are both. You could say, well, I don't know. I don't even want to say they distort reality. What is reality? But they are lenses. They are veils. And they do give us different perspectives on things. I'm just also very aware that the movie, which is actually my favorite movie, and maybe I'm thinking maybe I should, if we're going to have time to read another excerpt, I did want to read from Rear Window because I feel like we're in the Rear Window moment now. We're all voyeurs. I don't know who's watching this right now. I went on this was a mindfulness sharing with these people who were strangers to me. And there's this one guy lying down. I probably shouldn't even be talking about this. Lying down. I had no idea what he's doing on this call. And there's something just very titillating and voyeuristic about these all of these different events. Usually on Zoom, it's like everybody's zooming around, looking in everybody's window. I mean, we're all now Jeffries. We're all Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window. We don't even need the broken. Well, we have a brokenness, and it's called the pandemic. That's the brokenness, as well as racism, obviously. But there's, that's not keeping us inside. But the pandemic is our brokenness right now. And so it feels so much of the moment. That movie for me is always new, is always with me. In so many different ways. It's I think it was Hitch's favorite movie actually. Not that matters.
Sharon, how about for those who are not so familiar with it, can you it's terrible, but can you give us a 20-word summary of the movie and then read your section?
I was going to skip around. Rear Window. You have a man who was a photographer who's maybe modeled after Robert Capa, and he's got a broken leg, and he's caught, and it's summer, and he's in the village, and he's looking, and he's just stuck there, and he's got this much younger girlfriend, Grace Kelly, who comes in and who's catering to him, and he's sitting there looking out the window, and he thinks he's seen a murder across the way, as well as just sort of looking in on this, the dancer, Miss Torso. There's the newlywed couple. There are all of these different people. There's an artist, a lot of women who are across the way. There's Miss Lonely Hearts, who I have something to say about, who is much more suited, I think, to Jeff, who is actually, the actor is only a year different in age from him. There's this whole issue of whether or not he should be looking across the way. It's too long. This is too long already, this plot summary. And he thinks he's seen a murder, and now what should he do? And how can he figure it out? And then this question of rear window ethics rears its head. So I was going to read some of these sections about this. So this is Jeffries saying, this is from the script, Jeffries, much as I hate to give Thomas J. Doyle too much credit, he might have gotten a hold of something when he said that was pretty private stuff going on out there. He's talking about this friend who's a detective. I wonder if it's ethical to watch a man with binoculars and a long focus lens. Do you suppose it's ethical, even if you prove he didn't commit a crime? And then Lisa, that's Grace Kelly, says, I'm not much on rear window ethics. And then Jeffrey says, of course they can do the same thing to me. Watch me like a bug under a glass. And so you have this ethics of looking and of acting upon what he thinks he sees. That is what he ponders when Doyle has momentarily convinced him to give up on his suspicion that his neighbor has murdered his wife. Jeffries has doubts about what he is doing if it proves his neighbor is innocent. If, on the other hand, his voyeurism catches a criminal, then he might well feel justified, he seems to be implying. Hitch sets up this ethical quandary for his viewers to ponder as well, and I think we are all pondering this now. If as viewers, we're hyper aware of our own watching, we all are very aware of this, because it is raised to the second degree, we're watching Jeffries watching, are we implicated or somehow absolved of any guilt? Does looking at looking cancel itself out? We are, after all, watching Jeff like a bug under a glass. What is the ethics of looking if it is looking at what others see? Is it still voyeurism if we are watching a voyeur? And so then it made me think about what I was doing in my own writing. There are some voyeurists, there are episodes in here. There's one episode, which I'll just say is when I was a teenager in my bedroom in Brooklyn. There's a knock on the door, and our neighbor is standing there with a shotgun in the back of this teenage boy who's basically been caught looking in my window. And when he says to my dad, what should we do with him? And my dad says, shoot him, which I thought was, perfect that my dad would say that. And then, of course, the kid is freaking out and they let him go away, but they scare the daylights out of him. But in Rear Window, Jeffries, he wrestles with this issue of rear window ethics. And I wondered about this in terms of my own memoir, especially as I move on to episodes in my adult life. How closely do I hew to the truth as I remember having experienced it? And I then look again at the scene of the murder. And again, I don't think I could have done this close viewing without being able to stop and start and stop and start. The way, in the old-fashioned way of seeing movies, things just flew by. And what I noticed in this murder scene, I'll just read this small part. I noticed more details from the vantage point of Jeff's binoculars. In one quick shot, Thorwald is wiping down, this is the salesman across the way, he's wiping down the inside of his metal sample case and replacing the costume jewelry that he sells wholesale. They look like rhinestone necklaces. I have never paid such close attention before. When I was a child, my dad sold shoe ornaments. After he'd been away on a sales trip, he would come home, open up his black sample case, and pull out a tray of rhinestone clip-on shoe buckles. Rhinestones for women. 2 salesmen with their cases of fake glitter, their practically bedridden wives. In watching Rear Window and thinking about my life, I have come to see the relationship between Thorwald and his wife as a darker version of my own parents. And it's only through really watching Rear Window that I basically say that I must have felt ready to face the possibility that my father may have had affairs, which was the hardest thing for me to face and write about. I'll stop there. So it was really in watching Rear Window and seeing what I saw and seeing the connection between the bedridden wife who's killed and my mother. My father did not kill her, but seeing those connections that I was able to finally face this other dark truth about my dad.
Yeah. It's that instinct toward sort of the destruction of family myth and the kind of real crystalline awareness of your own myth making or desire not to myth make, or lovers' tendency to myth make about you. It's really, really interesting thematically how it ties the book together. I love that. I just, actually, there's a section in David's book that David, maybe you have something else you wanted to read, but it's on page 170. About the bow and the lyre. Somehow maybe it would link to what Sharon just was talking about in terms of perception. Or do you want to do something else? If you want to,
I'm curious what you've come up with.
Well, I just this thing about you met Seamus Heaney. Maybe you should go to that, actually, the paragraph before, because maybe we'll get you to play music at the end, and why not?
Yeah. I was thinking about Rear Window ethics before. Principle number 1, don't get caught. That's my lesson for that kid, with a gun. Do not get caught. Principle number 1.
Principle number 1, pull the shades down if you're doing anything nefarious.
Yeah, pull the shades down if you're doing a Zoom call at night. Yeah, so in part of this, the end of the book, I start to talk about, things from my own past, things I wrote, classes I took. And I felt very lucky to have taken this writing class with Seamus Heaney, the great late Irish poet who later won the Nobel Prize, who, I don't know how I got into this class, because I didn't know what I was doing. I knew nothing about poetry, wrote my own weird things. And he, not only was he a fantastic teacher and there were fantastic students who went on to become important poets in the class, he just really knew how to teach. He knew how to take all manner of weird things turned in. Whatever you did, he would make something out of it. And so as a later becoming a teacher myself, I always tried to learn what you could gain out of something, whatever is turned in by anyone. Even if it's not something so stellar, you can turn it into something of relevance for the moment, the place, in a way that's what learning and teaching is about. So I haven't thought about these paragraphs, but I'll just read them because you picked them out, Edie. The last time I saw Seamus Heaney was in Dublin, after he came to a talk I gave on my book, Survival of the Beautiful, at the Science Gallery, a most unusual museum that blends the empirical and the artistic. I talked about how evolution was always considered by Darwin to include the unfurling and development of beauty in appearance, act, and process, in those endless animal forms appearing over the millions of years that have led up to this instant. It wasn't poetry, but I did play some music, showing what the music of the nightingale has in common with the song of the whale. I don't know if we were listening to or listening as, to imagine something Wittgenstein might say. Seamus was always gracious whenever I sent him things, and he told me he had gotten through some rough years, but was seeing everything in a more positive light. I'm sorry I didn't see him more often. I'm sorry I didn't see him again. In this new century, the bow and the lyre have become the laser and the bell. The tools that can be metaphors for the cosmos change, but the use of instruments to catch hold of the divine continues. The burning light of reason reflects in the peal, P-E-A-L, of the song, cutting through oneness. You may race by or resound with the quaking leaves. Bertrand Russell remembered this. Wittgenstein used to come see me every evening at midnight and pace up and down my room like a wild beast for 3 hours in agitated silence. Once I said to him, "Are you thinking about logic or about your sins?" "Both," he replied, and continued his pacing.
Thank you. Yeah, so, one thing I find, I mean, it is really interesting to have these two books together. Both of you have a kind of suspicion of the matter you're writing about, and both of you have a desire to grapple and embrace it. It's like a kind of counterphobic impulse in some way. So both of you having taken these epic journeys in the writing, is there a sort of logic that you now use retrospectively to justify your life, or okay, I'll try to ask just one question here. Do you have this habit now of seeing yourself as a character in your life with this meta narrative, kind of a logic, like kind of as if your life had subtitles unfurling beneath your acts, having now narrativized your life, or in David's case, this obsession with, Wittgenstein and his relevance in all these art forms? Either of you can take the question.
First, I don't think there was
not one.
There was not one. Each time it's a different one. And I think I guess I would say that I think as I've said already, I think we're always seeing ourselves through various lenses. And I very self-consciously, deliberately took the Hitchcock lens and put that one on. Although each movie is different, and I did with the movies, you could say also it was the Sharon lens, because I saw the Hitchcock movies and they served my purpose. So you could say that I was seeing Hitchcock through the Sharon lens. And again, what we read into a movie, we all have different interpretations of movies, but we are also texts, but we're also multifarious. So I don't know if it's changed my way of looking at things, although I do feel gratified that perhaps I have taken this brokenness or these wounds, these traumas, and I hope that through the power of art, I have transformed them into something beautiful. I guess I do believe in beauty, and I do hope that even on the level of the sentence, on the level of the story, on the level of the weave, that there's something beautiful that emerged from it. This is what I've had to do. This is, it's the Rumpelstiltskin. I'm spinning the straw of my life and hoping that I'm turning it into a kind of gold. I mean, I think that's what I've done with poems. How many happy, happy, happy poems do we write? Sometimes, but a lot of the poems also come out of a place of suffering. I just think that a lot of art does come out of the vexed places, and at least there's something at the end of it. At least there's something that you can hold up and say, okay, I did this. I've created something from it. But I think we all, even if you're not an artist, we all look at different texts in the world and project ourselves into them and read ourselves through them. So yeah, we're all staying home and watching movies, and I'm sure identifying with them in all different ways. So go back and watch some Hitchcock movies and see where you can read yourself into the script. I adore his movies. Actually, I don't feel very conflicted, ambivalent about them. I adore Hitchcock. Not the person. I would not have wanted to know. The movies. The movies, yes.
And one thing that just in relation to what you were saying before, somewhere in the book you quote Sigrid Nunes saying something about, how what we grieve defines us, or somehow the lack creates a substance of a life. And I always felt that also in relation to what you're saying, that elegy is the soul of art, or the motivate, we're always doing this trace after. And so one thing I just was very moved by the fact that at the end of your book, you're still living your life. You leave it much more open-ended than most of those kind of immersive memoirs like the Mary Carrs of the world and others. It's not like, oh, and therefore I'm going to rack. Like, no, I'm going to rack. There's like a high body count, where at the end it's like, well, I don't know. And that open-endedness was really kind of It was almost, both in a way, now that I think of it, both of you and your books with credos, David's is marked as a credo, and yours is kind of a credo of like, okay, I'm going to be that beautiful tarot card experiential fool going off the cliff and these, but go ahead.
It's hopeful, I feel like, I had that dream at the end, which I hope somebody will go through the journey of reading the chapters. And in the dream, I have this dream where I've transformed vertigo and that terrifying moment that Jimmy Stewart has, and I've transformed it into something very positive. I felt like that was a gift I gave myself in having journeyed through this book. I want to hear from David, though.
Yeah, David, also, can you talk a little bit about that amazing aphoristic creed? And then you end with one of my favorite poets at the end with Rosemary Waldrop. I love that.
Yes.
We almost may have to read that as part of our.
I can read that, yeah.
No, talk about the credo. Talk about the choice of ending with the credo.
Saying a credo, actually, in my sense of using the word credo, comes back to John Cage, and that he used that phrase in somewhere in his book Silence, and he had a huge influence on me. And I was fortunate to meet him also when I was in college, and he liked all these people: Wittgenstein, Thoreau, Buckminster Fuller, and he also would cut and paste things, and he always said like, oh, yeah, I studied with Schoenberg, and he said, to become a composer, you must be obsessed with harmony. You must have an innate feeling for it. And he said, well, I don't really have any feeling for harmony. I guess I should do something else. Maybe I'll study architecture. And he found a great architect professor who said, you must live and breathe architecture or you'll never get anywhere. I don't know. I didn't feel that way. And so because he was so in between, I could identify with this. And, that book also written in aphorisms, a kind of philosophical, musical credo, the whole book, Silence, about how you should become an artist. You find your way. It's all around you. It's what you don't think. He writes like composing music, playing music, listening to music. What should they possibly have to do with one another? Nothing, So all these opposite things that, and he wrote like, what I love about Zen, D.T. Suzuki told me, no one wins. Nobody wins in Zen. I said, I don't want to win. I don't want to lose. I don't want to play games. I want to do these in-between things. And so that kind of inspired me. But, as Sharon said, I also believe in beauty. And when I read passages from this book, I also think many of them, boy, that's the way I thought 25 years ago. Like, that's really how, this is different. Like, I'm simpler now. I'm more direct. I don't want to get stuck in irony and ambiguous, uncertain European novels that are one paragraph, 200 pages, Some of those I don't have patience for. I want something more simple and enveloping and direct. And, one part of this book, I interview this artist, Doug Hall, and I interview him again 21 years later. I still haven't finished the book. We're still talking about this. He still like hates what he said. He keeps editing it. He finally got the book, says, okay, I look forward to reading this. I'm not going to read my part. He's still mad at me, somehow. And the whole thing is like, you would look at this book and you wouldn't be able to say, well, why does he put this here and this there? Like, it just is. It's the way it happened. And it's this uncertain record, but because it's in these short, separate paragraphs, you could like open wherever and read one, maybe another. And it refers to other books written that same way. And it's not like literary criticism, or it's like assembly. And I do like to connect people. I do like to recommend and jump around. I'd say, one of my many faults, one of the greatest faults is unable to stay focused on one thing. I'll have a conversation. I'll talk here. I'll jump here. I'll jump there. What's the point of talking with me? I never stay on the same topic.
David, I'm going to break in and say.
So I feel like that.
No, I'm just going to stop you for a sec. This is a book you were born to write. This is of all your many, but this is an amazing book. Seriously, of all your works. And David and Sharon, I really feel that it marries your gifts as a would-be poet, or I know you and Sharon have had conversations about being a poet or not.
That was my question for him: why he gave up writing poetry?
Yeah,
some of his poetry in there. Are we going to go to some questions?
I can answer it. My best answer to that is my mother. Involves my mother coming to some college graduation event, seeking out Seamus Heaney. Go talk to him about me. Like, oh my God, this is what your mother's going to do. So she goes and finds him at some fancy reception with her big frizzy hair and says, "So, David Rothenberg, he's my son. Is he a poet?" So Seamus says, "Well, he's on the edges."
So that did it for you.
No, it became his life. It became.
I always wanted to be a poet. After graduation, actually, I went off. I was living in England and Norway for a few years, and I would write these long poems. I got into A.R. Ammons. I was corresponding with him. Like, he wrote these pages and pages of crazy poems. Says, "I'm going to write that. I'm going to write this kind of thing. I'm going to go study with Archie Ammons at Cornell. I'm going to be a crazy poet." I wrote these really long poems, and then after a while, I started to think, like, I like writing these things, but I don't know anyone who reads this stuff. And like, maybe if I started to write the same way but didn't call it poetry, maybe people might be less afraid of it. And I still haven't written these kinds of books I want to write. I have that on the shelf. That whole. Well, I've always wanted to do these different things. I don't know what to.
It ain't over till it's over. So there's always something else. There's always something more.
Right. And I also feel, I don't know how many of you writers out there feel, but I don't feel in control of what I write next. It kind of happens. It takes over. Like, I don't want to do it, but then it starts to come, and I start writing this, and it goes in this other direction, and then it's kind of becoming itself. It may not become something that people are more interested in than something that was more guided, but it just sort of happens. Like, it's emerging on its own.
Well, you have your music. I guess I've always been a juggler. From the time I was a child, I had a book on each chair in the living room. So I'd go from one chapter, then read another and another. And I've always been a juggler. I'll always enjoy juggling. Well, I think also because you can write a really good poem, a draft of a poem in 15 minutes. You can work on it for half hour, an hour, and then what? Well, you can read, then you can do translation, then you can write an essay. Then you need to be juggling. So I have to say, once I was started on the memoir, that took a lot of hours. That was so many sentences and paragraphs and I wasn't used to it. I'd written a dissertation. I actually have a PhD too in poetry, of all things.
Yeah.
Wasn't used to such a long bit of creative writing. So it was a different project entirely. I have such respect for people who write prose, as long as they write it as well as poetry, and as long as poetry is written as well as prose. It's got to go both ways.
So shall we go? I think, David, if you want to check with, do you want to
dig up some questions here? See if I can find them. I'm going to open up these closed windows.
And while we're doing that, Sharon, do you want to read some little last paragraph that you would like to leave us with, like a little lagniappe while he's doing that?
Oh, that's a good question. Lagniappe, huh? Oh, wait a minute.
And or we could read some of David's credo if we wish. You choose.
Who's reading it? Who's reading the credo?
Maybe you read so well, David, but I'm giving you mini tests.
I'm looking to the event, see if there's any comments here. These various places where it might be. Let's see. Hold on. Is there a comment worth commenting on? I don't want it to play sound. It's spinning around. Maybe it's not. Oh, there it is. Okay. Pleased to be watching. Thank you. I'm turning this sound off.
Is there? So this was just from. These are questions that I was asking about. Again, it's about heterosexual desire, so this is thinking about Vertigo, which I think is now his most is Hitch's most popular. It rose to number 1 above Citizen Kane at some point. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it or rewatch it. So, what is it Judy wants? As Freud famously asked, what do women want? I keep asking myself that question throughout the entire movie. She wants, as my brief, cruel lover put it, the spectacle of his desire for her, which will eventually turn into love for her. The power of a woman's need to be desired and to allow herself to be transformed into someone else. This finds its complement in the power of a man's need to control and make over the object of his desire. And then these are some more questions. What is it I have wanted in relationship after relationship? What is it men want? Most heterosexual women I know at some point in their adult lives ask themselves this question. Is it to dominate, to love and be loved, to feel worshipped, to be mothered, to abuse or be abused? I don't really think I have an answer.
I can answer that. I can answer that. A member of this class.
For all heterosexual men.
Yes, of course. I would say that when it comes to love, I think men want to feel that they're finally doing something of clear value for another person. Like it's not about us. We want to be finally doing something that matters to someone else without this doubt, with uncertainty. Because when it comes to ourselves, we're so uncertain. We haven't got a clue. Like what really matters? Why doing this or that? We love this person or that person. You know, you feel this desire pulling you. But if we could just do something for someone, and they would say, "Look, I really appreciate you. I really need what you're getting." So I feel like I you know, in love and relationships, I'm looking to be necessary, to be needed, and to be kind of in that way. I know it's dumb, but you know, what can you say? Right?
You should start a new.
You know, right?
You should start a new Robert Bly movement. You know, you're
right. Yeah. Why not?
Men who are necessary instead of women who run with the wolves. Okay.
We can run the world. It's fine. You know, men have messed stuff up. You know, we can back off for a while. I don't know. I feel, you know, endlessly motivated by uncertainty, trying to stop myself from doubting everything I do. You know, that tendency is around, and then that's kind of why I want to simplify in a way that I feel like you know, I can read the end. I can read the epigram after. Rosemary Waldrop, if you want.
Yeah, please read that. And then I think then, are we speaking for an hour? Are we?
Yeah, we just have a few minutes. I didn't see any questions. There's definitely people watching, and they're saying very nice things. No one has typed in a question. That's okay, because we have so many questions for ourselves. So the very end of the book, a quote from Rosemary Waldrop just says this. I had already studied mathematics, a mad kind of horizontal reasoning, like a landscape that exists entirely on its own, when it's more natural to lie in the grass and make love glistening the whole length of the river. Because small, noisy waves, as from strenuous walking, pounded in my ears, I stopped my bleak Saturday while a great many dry leaves dropped from the sycamore. The possibility must have been in color from the beginning.
Yeah, so that's such a nice quotation to end on, given that it speaks to both a kind of theme of what we've talked about so far, the kind of, you know, the idea of a kind of, you know, we wander through our lives and we kind of make a logic up as we go to justify it. But the ambiguity and the obliqueness and the opacity of art ends up sort of offering some kind of greater contribution. So for our time right now, when we don't quite have any traumatic event, doesn't have that beauty of retrospect, somehow to hold on to these two precious artworks that you guys have offered right now, you know, maybe it will help people as a kind of a little kaleidoscopic microcosm in some way. That
there are talks about perception, the possibility of the reddish green, right? That the possibility is there. He didn't read that particular paragraph, which is one of my favorites. And the, you know, of the duck rabbit
season, duck season,
and the possibility through language of making those things happen. And I would say, you know, in the same way that the possibility of seeing one's life through Hitchcock or through another cultural lens also creates possibility and creativity and redemption in a certain way.
It's important to find these artworks, whatever, you know, and talk about how they mean things to each other and share them. And this is a good time to sit and read and talk about books and films and nature and talk to each other and like really try different things and haven't been trying because we're stuck in this pandemic cycle of uncertainty. And sure, it's a strange time to be writing and publishing books, but it always is. And there's always more amazing, interesting things out there than people find out about. Like just go experiment. Try things. And I'm so happy. We didn't mention that I confess I'm also the publisher of these books. And for some strange reason, I decided to become a publisher a few years ago. It actually has to do with Rebecca Solnit, a writer I admire.
Love her.
And the fact that, but about the fact that I would take down some Rebecca Solnit books from my shelf. Every few years she puts out a book. Each one was printed on worse paper. It would fall apart. The more recent books, when I opened it up, and they seemed to cost more money, and they were in physically worse quality. Like I could do better than this, Like these big publishers are putting out this badly made things. Why? Books should be beautiful.
These are beautiful books.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we can make beautiful things even in this time of struggle. And so I want to do my little part to do that. I'm so happy we could publish Sharon's book because it's this amazing, unique work. I'm so happy Edie has come here to talk about this because she's a writer I admire so much. She's written, many beautiful books. Some of them have been published on nice paper, but maybe all of them. and so, I would love to do more things like this. It's so nice to have people talking like this in this unusual times. Of course, I'd love to do it in person, and I hope we'll be back to that kind of world one of these days.
Hope and possibility.
That's right. Yeah. As the sky darkens around here, the screen gets brighter and brighter, and it's time to shut it off and go out into the night.
All right. Okay. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us. If you missed it, you can watch it again wherever you watch things. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
See you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.